Welcome back to Smitty's Learning Room. Today we continue to work on the HSC option Sports Medicine, and we're moving on to environmental considerations today, and specifically looking at temperature regulation. So at the moment in the HSC option Sports Medicine, we're having a look at what role do preventative actions play in enhancing the well-being of the athlete. And previously we've learned about physical preparation in relation to pre-screening, skill technique, physical fitness, warm-up, stretching and cool-down. The last video had a look at sports policy and the sports environment, so having a look at different rules for different types of sports and matching of opponents and protective equipment and safe grounds. And this video, we're going to have two videos on this concept of environmental considerations. And the first video is going to have a look at temperature regulation, so convection, radiation, conduction, and evaporation. So as we said before, there's a few things that come from this focus question: what role do preventative actions play in enhancing the well-being of the athlete? And it's important that you remember these four big areas, because you may be asked to recall on these and you'll need to know information from every single dot point. And so, as I said before, we've already had a look at physical preparation and sports policy and the sports environment. If you haven't got notes on those, I advise you to go back to those videos and get some on those before you start today's video on environmental considerations. So we start by having a look at what does the environmental considerations actually mean. Now, the environment in which an athlete trains and competes in can have a significant impact on their performance. Now, when we talk about the environment, we're not just talking about the physical environment, say the playing grounds or the stadiums that they're playing in, but we're also talking about the natural environment, such as the temperature. Now, the extreme temperatures, either high or low, can have significant physiological effects on the body, and this is due to the body trying to control thermoregulation to maintain core body temperature. So obviously, if the athlete is exposed to varying temperatures or extreme temperatures, the body might have to work overtime to try and maintain thermoregulation. And we're going to have a look at a few aspects today which helps the body maintain that core temperature. So there are 5 ways in which the body loses heat, and we're going to have a look at these today. And the first one is radiation, then convection, conduction, evaporation, and respiration. So we'll start by having a look at radiation. Now, radiation is the transfer of heat from one surface to another through space. So for example, the sun transferring heat to the earth, or back the other way, the earth transferring heat into the space. And so therefore, obviously when we look at heat and how does heat actually affect us from radiation, obviously the radiation caused by infrared rays from the sun can cause our body to overheat. And so it's important to understand that when you're playing or training, you understand that there is radiation coming from the sun, and that can cause our body to heat up or to overheat and have the need to regulate our body temperature. And so obviously if radiation levels are high or the temperature is high, we need to adapt our training or performance to suit this. The next concept is convection. Now, convection is the transfer of heat through direct contact with the air and the body. So for an example, an athlete moving faster will experience more convection than one that is moving slower. So when we have a look at these two runners, we've got a runner that's sort of running on a little bit of an angle up a hill here, and we've got a runner that's running downhill. So generally, let's say we're running and it's not a windy day, but if we increase our speed, we're going to increase the drag against us, and that drag, that air coming over us, will actually cool us down. Now, that's generally sometimes on a hot day quite a nice feeling and allows our body to cool. But if we're training in the middle of winter, or if it's an extremely windy day and we're exposed to extreme levels of convection, then this may become an issue. So things that you might need to think about are the sort of equipment that you might wear. Are you wearing a windproof vest or some sort of warmer clothing to deal with the fact that you're going to be exposed to more convection, as opposed to if you're just wearing, say, a t-shirt or a singlet or your usual training or performance wear? The next concept is conduction. Now, conduction is the transfer of heat from the body through direct contact with another object. Now, something that's really easy to explain this concept is, when we apply ice or heat to the body, the heat from that actually comes straight through. When we're talking about sporting equipment, or when we're applying conduction to sport and how does that actually affect us, things like if players are playing on a concrete surface such as a tennis court, or if they're running or riding on asphalt, the heat from the ground can actually come up and go through their body or through their feet, and obviously this can cause issues. A good way that we can use conduction for the athlete is that if the athlete has overheated or is sort of suffering hypothermia, so too cold, we can use hot and cold products such as heat packs and ice packs to help bring the body back to core temperature. The concept of evaporation is something that's really important with athletes, and so probably the most common thing that you'll be able to understand and experience and know. So when heat from the body in the form of liquid, so sweat, is converted to a gas to remove the heat from the body. So when our body exercises, I mentioned right at the start that we go through some physiological changes because we have an increased heart rate, we have our blood flow is increasing to try and get oxygen around to the body, and so therefore there's heat that's being built up in our body, and how our body tries to cool our internal temperature to about 37 degrees is by evaporation. And so what happens is our body overheats from the inside and we begin to sweat. And as we sweat, that process is actually cooling our body down. So when we exercise, you'll find that our hottest parts of our body is actually where we're sweating. So for our face or under our armpits. Having a little bit look at some information from previously in the syllabus, we learnt that young athletes and children have difficulty with swelling because their sweat glands aren't fully developed, and so therefore evaporation is actually not necessarily the most common form of warming up, cooling down the body, because they're unable to do that. And that's why it's really important to monitor young athletes and children in environments where they're exposed to extreme heat, because their bodies can't sweat as well as adults can, and thus they aren't able to maintain their core temperature as well. The final concept we have a look at is respiration, and this is the transfer of heat through the exhaling of air and gases. And so basically when we breathe in warm or cold air, so sometimes when we're, especially in altitude areas or areas where it's quite cold, the athlete may have difficulty breathing because of the temperature of the air that they're actually taking in. And so what needs to happen is the athlete needs to acclimatise to that and get used to that, or sometimes you'll find athletes using indoor facilities during the winter months to deal with this concept. So in wrapping up the environmental conditions and having a look at heat transfer or heat regulation, we know that if we have an increase in exercise, we're going to have an increase in the heat produced by the body. So we need to work out some way to regulate this problem. Now, the body loses heat mostly by evaporation of sweat. So if we're going to look at different concepts in which ways which we can regulate the heat, evaporation is the most common way which humans regulate body temperature. Other conditions, including hot and cold temperatures, can impact on the body's capacity to control the core body temperature. So when we're looking at this from a sports medicine point of view, it's really important to understand that because of extreme temperatures or even just regular temperatures, we need to have an understanding of radiation, convection, conduction, evaporation, and respiration, so that we can either make adaptations to training or to when games are played or the environments in which they're played in, and also to make adaptations to an athlete's training program or even the clothing that they're wearing to try and make sure that they are regulating their body temperature in extreme environmental conditions or even just regular environmental conditions. So coming back to the focus question, what role do preventative actions play in enhancing the well-being of the athlete? By now you should have some information around the physical preparation of the athlete. sports policy and the sports environment, and environmental considerations. Now, there's lots of information that come from those three areas which can enhance the well-being of the athlete. And we've got one more to discuss, which will be the next video, which will be around taping and bandaging, and how does taping and bandaging enhance the well-being of the athlete.